think I will call the meeting to order. We do have a really full schedule, and we have one, two, three, four, a quorum with 8 of our 11 council members pending a represented. I'll note that Ann Neville is here on behalf of Dave Livermore. Welcome, Ann. So we do have a quorum. You received an agenda by email a week ago. I don't think we had any requests to change that agenda, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any debate or discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Okay, we also need to have a motion to approve the meeting notes of our last meeting, March 10, 2021. Someone willing to make that motion?
Moved.
Thank you, Leland. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Tom.
Tom, any debate or discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed, nay. Any abstentions? That's unanimous. So let's quickly go through some brief committee reports and council project status and updates. Laura, let's start with you on the technical team and the Salinity Advisory Council or Committee.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Oh, I'm getting some feedback. If you all wouldn't mind muting if you're not talking. So yesterday, the tech team met for their quarterly meeting. We had presentations on monitoring fish and waterfowl tissue for mercury and PFAS. Jim Harris presented on that. And we also had a discussion on topography LiDAR data for the entire Great Salt Lake. So those were the two main discussion points. Earlier this month, the subcommittee met to review and rank the Great Salt Lake Tech Team projects. And we were able to award 5 projects, and they are in no particular order. The first project is microplastic transport to Great Salt Lake through the Logan and Bear River system, and that is a USU project, and the sponsor is Janet Rainey. The second project is a multi-tiered assessment of the primary production in the Great Salt Lake. That's also a USU project. Soren Brothers is the PI there, and that is the second year funding of a 2-year project. The third project is a UGS project, wetland water budget and the wetland change analysis, wetland water budget and the wetland change analysis for the Nature Conservancy's Great Salt Lake Shorelands Preserve. That will be Stefan Kirby's project. We have a mass balance project by USGS. That's the characterization of the mass salt mass in the upper brine layer and the deep brine layer of the south arm of the Great Salt Lake. And the fifth project is Ryan Rowland's project from USGS, and it is the monitoring and computation of salt loading to the Great Salt Lake from the major riverine outputs for the water year 2022. We were also able to fund through our invasive species funding, Karen Kettering's revegetation project, where she's looking at innovative approaches to enhance seed-based restoration of Great Salt Lake wetlands. So those are all the tech team grants. We did have a total of 11 applications and almost $600,000 worth of requests. So we were able to fund $200,000 of grant research projects for fiscal year 2022. That work will start June or July 1st. If there are no questions on the Great Salt Lake Tech Team, their next meeting is September 14th, if any of you are interested in attending. I'll move on to the Salinity Advisory Committee. They met, this ecosystem subcommittee met last week to finalize their section of the salinity matrix. And now we'll be working to finalize the salinity range memo and the entire matrix with the group, and we'll be reconvening back in June and make sure that the group is meeting the objectives of the charter, because as you know, the 5-year monitoring period of the railroad is coming up to an end here soon, and we just want to make sure the transition goes smoothly once their monitoring period is complete. So that's all the updates I have on Tech Team and Salinity Advisory Committee, unless anyone has any questions, or Jeff Dimblicker or Jim Harris, if you guys have anything to add.
Thanks, Laura. Any questions or comments? Okay, great. Let's move to the next one. We've asked Leland Myers to provide an update on the reuse project that was initiated by the council. Leland?
Hi. Laura, do you want to run that slideshow? Did you have it up? If not, I do. Can't hear you, Laura.
Go for it. I'll pull it up right now as a backup, but I didn't have it up.
It's not letting me share the presentation. Am I allowed to share?
You should, if you click on the present now down at the bottom. Does it not come up for you?
Nope, it won't.
Okay, well, let me do this.
I click and click on it, but it doesn't like me.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I'm going to pull it up.
I think you just told it it doesn't like Leland. So let me give you a background. We wanted to look at the impact of water reuse potential on the Great Salt Lake and essentially what the status of water reuse is relative to the Great Salt Lake Basin. And that includes primarily the Wasatch Front from Utah County up through Weber County, Box Elder County. And so what we've done is we've surveyed all of these communities to see what their flows are, also to look at what their potential for reuse is. We're also looking at how, have you been able to get that up yet? There we go. So.
Can you all see it?
Yeah, I can see it. You want to go to presentation on it? So you just hit the next slide once you get it up.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm going to go to the next slide.
Okay. We're also looking at the regulatory requirements relative to it. This just shows what those are. There are two components to the regulations. There are those which deal with the water rights and the permissible uses that are involved, and then those which deal with the technicals, with the engineering required for and the required treatment for water reuse. In water reuse, in terms of the technical requirements, there are two types. There's a type 2 and a type 1. Type 2 is essentially use on a farm, a restricted area. Type 1 is unrestricted. It could be used on as a secondary water source for homes and so forth. There is no direct type that would deal with direct to home potable reuse yet. And so that would have to come as a standard if and when there ever is a proposal that would occur. Next slide. Relative to the water rights, basically the municipality or the agency which has a POTW, or in the case of those which discharge to a district, would work with that district. If they don't enlarge the water right, if they're using that water right for the same use that it was originally intended, in other words, it's for as a 100% consumptive water right, if they're using it to supply water to a municipality or that service area, then they can reuse it for that same purpose. It only requires adjustment if you're changing perhaps the point of diversion or the use, and it maintains its same priority as a water right if you use it for the same purpose. Next slide. In terms of the design requirements, you have to have an approved filtration process in place. This would include, especially for type 1, so this would include some mechanism to filter it to a lower level of solids in the water and a higher level of treatment. It would have to have a biochemical oxygen demand of 10 milligrams per liter, a turbidity of less than 2 NTUs, TSS of less than 5, E. coli of less than 9. The total residual chlorine has to have a 1.0 milligram after 30 minutes of contact time, and the pH has to be between 6.5 and 9. This, with the requirement that was implemented about 4 years ago for POTWs to treat to 1 phosphorus, once the upgrades for all of the plants that are in the process of upgrading, there are very few plants that won't be able to meet this standard out of the plant, except for the top line, which is the filtration. Very few of them at the present time, with the exception of Jordan Basin plant, won't have the filtration in place. There are a few that are implementing filtration, though, as part of their upgrade, but only a portion of their flows are going in that direction. Next. So here are the major POTWs along the Wasatch Front. And their average flows in 2021. That's the 2019 to 2021 average flows. We then looked at what the reuse potential is. And at the bottom, you're seeing that there's 273,000 acre feet total water that's discharged from those plants annually, of which we believe almost half of that would be basically available for reuse. This does not include any kind of reuse like aquifer storage and recharge, which if they did that, a higher percentage could be done because it could be done year round. If you go to the next slide, this just defines how we define that calculation. We said that reuse could occur up to 8 months of the year. It could be up to 75% of their total flow. And that simply means that there'll be a balancing act of flows, and you're not going to get 100% of it, even during the highest water use, actually going into the reuse system. And that if you use those 2 data points, you're going to get a 50% annual reuse. Next slide. There are 11 major wastewater facilities along the Wasatch Front. 8 of them have reuse in some stage of consideration. Either they're talking about it seriously, they're preparing master plans that include it, or they're actually implementing something in a current upgrade. Now, there are smaller facilities out there that have already gone to reuse, but these are these major ones that discharge the majority of the water into the ecosystem. Some of those in the Utah County area, which has at least some potential effect on the lake, on Great Salt Lake, are looking seriously at reuse. Utah County, when we looked at their what you can do to talk about conservation, we ended up not even studying that, because after talking and meeting with the large water suppliers in Utah County, it appears that they'll be just struggling for enough water to meet their potential population growth, including reuse. And so of the 3 major facilities in Utah County, 2 of them are already in the planning or getting ready to implement stage of reuse. One is considering it heavily and looking at it for future use. The other ones, there are some stage of reuse consideration in place. And as an example, Central Valley has upgraded their overall plant, and they're including up to 15 million gallons a day of reuse potential, but that of their 55 total million gallons a day. So there are only 2 plants, amazingly, the ones that directly discharge to the Great Salt Lake, have no plans for reuse. They both have indicated that they feel it's higher and better use to discharge it to the lake. However, having said that, they also don't control the outcome. because they're not the water right holder, and the water right holder has a degree of say in what occurs as long as they can pick the water up before it's discharged. So reuse is right now going to occur at some level, certainly not at the 130 to 140,000 acre feet level, but it's going to be tens of thousands of acre feet that's going to go into reuse already. Next slide. If you look at the Bear River development, they're talking about for it 85,000. This is the study that was done by the state, and I think Utah State was involved. Wayne, I think he's online, and he was involved in that. They said the estimated depletion is 85,680 feet. That's the depleted amount for the study of the 220,000 that's in the total project water component, with the rest being return flows. And from the study, it indicated that 8.5 to 14 inches down for the lake would occur as a result of that. So if you just factor that and look at it from the standpoint of reuse, if you're going to hit somewhere between 100 and 140,000 acre feet that could go into reuse, that has an additional potential of 10 to 20 inches of down. Now, that does not assume that there'll be a significant return flow on this. Majority of it will probably go into evapotranspiration. It'll probably go into irrigation systems. So it probably won't have a significant amount of return flow, except a small amount going into the groundwater system that may go into the lake. Next slide. Reuse is not, it costs a lot of money, but to get it to reuse quality is not all that expensive. It's somewhere between 250,000 gallons, $250,000 per million gallons treated to 1.3 million. And the big difference between those two numbers is how readily available your system is to support inserting a reuse process in it. And that includes the hydraulic profile to the plant, but it's not a huge price tag. If you look at this at the same amount, if you're going to look at it for 100 million gallons, 100,000 acre feet, you're only still looking at about 100 to 150 million dollars to do that. So the real wild card in the cost side is what it takes to get that reuse water to a point of use. So that's where you connect it to either a secondary irrigation system, move it up to a secondary irrigation storage basin, whatever it takes to get it so that it can be reused. But the cost of actual treatment to get it there, because the plants are reaching a point where they're not going to have to upgrade their treatment to meet that standard other than by the addition of filters, is not all that great. Next slide. Are there any questions? So that's a brief update. Right now, we're looking at whether or not we're going to plan on doing a modeling exercise with water resource based on the similarity to the Bear River project. We may not even really need to do the modeling. We have an idea of what that impact is going to be anyway. So if there's any questions, I'll take them. If not, thanks.
Thank you, Leland. Any questions?
This is Chris Klein, Fish and Wildlife. I've got a question. On this question of highest and best use, who is kind of the ultimate adjudicator of that? Is it the water rights owner who decides for themselves what the highest and best use is, or does the Department of Natural Resources have a say in that? What's kind of the legal ramifications of that?
Reuse projects have to go through an approval process, both from the standpoint of drinking or water rights as well as water quality. But I don't see anything in those requirements that allow them to say no, simply because we think the higher and better use is to keep it in the lake. So I think that you would have to find a way to make that a viable answer if it was to be a viable answer. The way the rights look now, I believe that if they can treat it to that level, there's little someone can say that says you can't do it. as long as you're enlarging the water right. And as long as you meet the treatment standard.
Thank you, Chris. Other questions or comments? Thanks. Let's go on.
Just, Don, when will that be available?
Leland, when's the completion date for your
It's
study?
when I decide to do it. Right now, I'm looking at probably just producing a glossy from the report rather than a completely detailed report, because the information, and if that's the case, it'll be done by probably July, August.
Thank you, Leland. Let me get
Leland, this is Wayne. You said the plants, most plants don't have filtration in place. What kind of filtration is that? And how expensive is that?
Well, that's the $250,000 to $1.3 million is primarily filtration. You can do it with multiple types. The highest and best type of filtration that we do now are membranes. But membranes have a higher cost, and they're not necessary to meet those relatively low standards. The 5 TSS is all you're trying to get down to with the filtration. And so that's not a very high number, especially if what goes into the process is lower than that anyway. So out of a nutrient treatment facility, the TSS is probably going to be under 5. It's going to be under 10 on the BOD anyway. So if you're getting nutrient reduction in the treatment facility, you're going to, and which almost every upgrade now is meeting those kind of standards, you're going to meet that those numbers anyway. So all you need is a filter. And if you went, an example would be a year and a half ago, Central Valley bought 15 million gallons worth of filtering capacity. They're self-contained units, and the price for it without installation of it, the price for the filters alone was only $1.5–2 million. So it's not a huge price to go if you went with a cloth media filter to put the filtration into the system.
Thank you, Leland. Given the time constraints of our meeting here, if there are any more questions, let's refer them to the chat box. And we'll get a final report in a couple of meetings. Let me just briefly provide an update on 3 other projects we have ongoing. The first, integrated water and land use planning, is approved by the council. Forestry, Fire, and State Lands has entered into a contract to begin phase 1 framework assessment for a project to tell us how to integrate water use into local land use planning, achieve water use efficiency and conservation. That could result in highlighting some case studies, creating a toolbox for local governments and planners. Our contribution to that effort is $30,000 to get us through the end of the fiscal year. As you know, at that time, a $270,000 legislative appropriation kicks in to complete the project. And thanks to Representative Hawks for securing that, and to Marcel Shoup for providing a lot of early initiative to get this project approved by the legislature. Secondly, the state's Salinity Advisory Committee identified some weaknesses in what they call the equation of state, which is the equation used to calculate salinity in the south arm of the Great Salt Lake. So we allocated or contracted with USGS at a cost of $25,000 to evaluate the accuracy of that equation of state for describing south arm water with a wider range of density and salinity values than were used to develop the original equation. A second objective is to evaluate it for its potential to describe north arm water. The third project we have underway is a continuation of our communications support from R&R. They've been providing assistance to Laura and the Advisory Council to publicize our studies and projects, provide media training and materials for Laura. In addition, they're preparing 2 versions of brief video, I think a 3-minute version and a 5-minute version, to talk about the lake and the need to preserve and protect it for use by Laura and others. And we should have those videos to share at our next meeting. So sorry to fly through those, but we're running a little late. Any quick questions or comments? All right, great. Let's move to the next agenda item, conservation impacts on the Great Salt Lake. As you know, in 2020, we commissioned a report to identify the potential impacts of conservation on water resource planning, and especially the need and timing of water projects in the future. That study focused on 4 water providers in northern Utah: Bear River, Cache, Jordan Valley, and Weber Basin. and we received the report in September of 2020. This year, we decided to expand that report, and I believe Keith Larson of Bowen and Collins will share the results and describe that expanded report. Keith?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'll share here, and looks like that's coming across. Okay. So really quick, the focus of this expansion was to expand the study to pick up Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy as another water provider that we wanted to look at. So just a quick reminder of the original study. Consistent with your strategic plan, we wanted to look at the potential impacts of municipal and industrial water conservation on water reuse planning, and then develop an action plan from that. And as part of that, we looked at 4 entities, as you mentioned: Bear River, Cache, Jordan Valley, and Weaver Basin Water District. So what we were asked to do was to extend this analysis to the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. And there's several similarities that it has to the other entities in terms of what we did with this study. We used the same data set that we used for all the other entities, used the same set of population projections, water use data from the Water Division of Water Rights. We also applied the exact same method of analysis to this district, and its size and location makes it important to Great Salt Lake, like those other districts. The biggest difference from the other entities is that right now Metro does not have any planned participation in Bear River development, so the way that we discuss it will be a little bit different from what we had with the other entities. So just a reminder, the main deliverable of what we did with the previous study was to show a projection of demand over by year and associated supply with that. So this is Jordan Valley, just as a reminder, and included in that we showed, up at top, we showed what kind of supply would be needed if we were to use water at the levels that we were using back in 2000. And then we dropped that down based on various levels of conservation. So this dashed black line is what would be needed based on 2015 water use. The solid black, what would be needed for regional goal if we were to meet the state's regional conservation goals. And finally, what demand would need to be to keep development of large water projects, specifically the Bear River Development Project, to postpone that outside of the planning window of 2065. And so we went through that, and this was kind of a summary of the impact on Bear River development. Starting with historic use, we were looking as soon as 2010, but based on the conservation that had been achieved, we were able to postpone that at least 25 years to 2035. Implementing regional goals gets us another 20 years to 2055, and with some additional conservation, we can push it out beyond 2065. So that was the previous study. This is what we found applying that same approach to the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. And so what you see here is, again, the exact same information with supplies shown in the area graphs at the bottom and then projected demands in the future. A few things to point out on this chart. Number one, you'll notice the downward slope of existing supply, and that is based on the district's current planning efforts and results of climate change modeling and its impact on their supply. So you'll notice that. We do add in a bunch of different future supplies, and so we broke that into different areas and different types of water supply. And then what we did was same thing. We had year 2000 water use up top. Here's 2015, and being able to hit regional conservation goals is shown in the dark black line here. The last thing we did was we said, well, what kind of additional conservation would we need to postpone projects with direct impact on Great Salt Lake? And included in that, we took off these top 4 projects and included additional surface water development along the Wasatch Front canyons, reuse, which Leland mentioned, pulling that out of their current plan, aquifer storage and recovery, and then also the ULS project. They do have some new wells planned, which would indirectly affect the Great Salt Lake for sure, but because it was not a direct impact, we chose to just look at eliminating those top 4 projects and what that would require. So in short, we looked at what kinds of conservation would be required first, just simply on a gallons per capita per day. And you can see the previous results here and then the updated results in red. Metro currently sits at about 210 gallons per capita per day. To hit the regional conservation goal, that they would need to drop to 169. And then if we wanted to postpone those future large source development projects, we would be dropping to 148. You'll notice that this trends very closely to what we found with Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, which isn't entirely surprising as the location and profile is similar. This is just a graphical representation of the same information. You can see the per capita dropping and how each of those relate to each other. You'll note that Metro skips this step of additional conservation postpone Bear River development because they're not currently planning on it. But we do have for all the projects down here at the bottom. Okay, so we went over this in the previous study. This is just a detailed identification of activities that could be implemented to reach those recommended conservation levels or those required conservation levels to either hit the regional conservation goal or to postpone the projects that directly affect Great Salt Lake. A lot of numbers there. In the interest of time, I won't spend too much time on there, but very similar to what was observed in Jordan Valley again. Kind of hit just a couple of the big ones. Again, we have Metro shown in comparison to the other entities that are shown here. Increase in efficiency of 17%, matching the Jordan Valley number. Decrease in average residential lot size from just under 8,500 square feet to 7,300 square feet, a 14% reduction is needed in lot size. And then relative to outdoor water use, current cool season turf grasses for the state averages, or at least the Wasatch Front area averages around 69% of landscaped areas. That would need to be reduced for Metro to 35% for existing properties and 20% for new properties. And this is the most aggressive conservation scenario in which all development projects are postponed outside that 2065 window. Again, this is very similar to what we observed with Jordan Valley in terms of reduction in those higher water use cool season turf grasses. So I think that's it. I did see one question come across, if I can find it. And then Don, I'll let you open it up for questions. It's like earlier graphs showed that climate change predictions indicated increasing water supply in the Bear River up to 1965, or maybe that's 2065, or at least the northern region. Wayne, do you want to help me understand that question? I'm not sure I understand that. Is that referring to?
Yeah, your graph from the earlier study showed the blue area there increasing. I guess it really increases 2035 and then stabilizes the blue part. And I guess you're taking climate change into account. The things I've read indicate decreasing water supplies. What's that increase based on?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Maybe I should have picked a different slide here, but this actually includes Jordan Valley. This one includes all developed supplies other than the Bear River. So Jordan Valley is also trending down over time with climate change. However, they have a number of projects identified to increase supply over time, including the Bear River Development Project, which is shown here. So that's not increasing as a result of climate change. It's increasing as a result of other new projects.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. Sorry, that was misleading.
Thank you, Keith. Do you have another question? Great. Well, we appreciate your good work on that, Keith, and expanding the project. Our next presentation will be by USGS. You know, there's a critical need to understand the importance of cycling and balance Great Salt Lake. So we joined with DWR and several others to contract with USGS to start that process. And I believe Brian Rowland and Kristen Rumsey are going to give that report today. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. So this is Ryan. Christine is going to go ahead and share her screen. We're going to tag team this presentation.
You couldn't bring anything that these guys are?
I'm going to just give a brief update on Great Salt Lake levels, and then Christine will get into the meat of the presentation on the nutrient work. So Christine's got the presentation up, and can you switch it to presentation mode? There she goes.
See that?
Yeah, but it's we're seeing the kind of the working mode, not presentation mode.
Okay, let me see. How about now?
You're close. Now go to display settings at the top of that screen and do swap. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So just a quick update for this group on Great Salt Lake elevation. So I'm showing I'm showing data back to the last advisory council meeting. And just so everybody's aware, the elevation of the south arm right now is at 4192.5. That's down about a tenth of a foot since the March advisory council meeting. Christine, if you hit the next button. Okay, so now we're seeing data back to about 2011. So right now we're down about 2 feet from just a year ago. So just pay attention to the data to the far right of the plot. So typically during the, there you go, leave it, yep, right there. Typically during the winter and early spring, we see a rise in the lake elevation at our Saltair gauge. And we've seen that this year, but it appears to have pretty kind of leveled off, and we didn't have much of a lake level rise this season. As everybody's aware, we're in a statewide drought, so this shouldn't be a big surprise. But just everybody be aware, we're within a 1.2 feet of the historic low measurement that we measured, that the USGS measured at the Saltair gauge. And based on the declines in previous years during the warm summer months, we're going to be bumping up against that record this year, I think. So just keep that on your radar. Hit the next button. So here's just the perspective of all the data we have for elevation at that Saltair gauge going all the way back to the 1850s. And you can see the 1963 low there. That's in the section there between 1952 and 1976, that low point. And we're pushing up against that now. So go ahead and next slide, please. And then just to give you an idea of where we're at with the major surface water inflows to Great Salt Lake, here I'm showing the cumulative stream flow measured at our Bear River gauge near Corinne, Utah. So the scale on the y-axis is in millions of cubic feet. And we're showing with the dark black line on this plot, the current water year. So the light orange or line below that is the lowest observed at this site, which was in 1992. The green area is kind of the average cumulative flow. That's the 25th and 75th percentile. And then the blue line at the very top is the highest observed cumulative flow at that site, which was in the 1984. And so if you look at the dark black line, we're well below the average area. We're up against that lowest ever measured. And right now the flow currently at Bear River is in the ranks in the 10th, between the 9th and the 5th percentile, somewhere in there. We're below the 10th percentile with current flow right now. And if you hit the next button, this is the Weber River near Plain City. Same type of plot. The dark black line is the current water year, and you can see we're pushing up against the lowest observed cumulative flow for that site, which was measured in 1988. And currently the flow at that site is in the 10th to 24th percentile. It's below normal. So we just wanted to make everybody aware of the current status of Great Salt Lake and some of the major inflows. And from here, Christine will take over and get into the meat of the nutrient work.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Good morning, everybody. Can you see the slides still and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll be updating you on some work the U.S. Geological Survey is doing to quantify nutrient mass and internal cycling in Great Salt Lake. This was a project funded in the fall of 2019 by the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program, and Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And this project is a fairly ambitious undertaking, and it required about a 10-person team to get this work done, and all those folks are listed here. So we're really lucky to have a lot of good team members to get this work completed. So I will be giving you an update on what we've done thus far. So just to start off, as we all know, the Great Salt Lake is a critical resource and habitat for wildlife as well as for the brine shrimp industry. And previous researchers have found or have hypothesized that the ecosystem is fed from the bottom up. So nutrients feed phytoplankton, which then sustain brine shrimp populations as well as birds. And so I'm just going to get a laser here. And so this food web, at the foundation of this food web is really a nutrient pool. And so the kind of overarching question that we had and that is guiding this work is, well, what are the processes that control nutrient availability in the Great Salt Lake? And what we know about nutrients in this system is that they enter from river inflows and atmospheric deposition and from groundwater. And once nutrients enter the system, they are taken up by phytoplankton, which are then consumed by brine shrimp. And through the excrement of these organisms, as well as from when they die and settle to the bottom of the lake, we know that there's a nutrient deposition as they fall through the water column and reach the deep brine layer and the sediments. And at this point, nutrients may be taken up by the sediments and buried and removed from the system. They might undergo chemical transformations where they turn into a gaseous phase and are released to the atmosphere, or they may undergo other chemical transformations and mix with the upper brine where they become bioavailable once again and enter the food web. And so to begin to understand which of these processes dominates, this study is guided by three main objectives. The first is to quantify nutrient mass from multiple pools in the lake. And so when I say pools, I just mean like a reservoir is, are basically trying to answer the question of where are nutrients in the system? Are they in the water column? Are they in the sediments? Are they in the biota? The second main objective is to estimate nutrient flux rates. This kind of gets at how nutrients are moving through the system. And then the third main objective is to estimate the nutrient burial in the sediment. So trying to figure out if nutrients are being sequestered in the sediments and removed from the ecosystem. So to achieve these main objectives, we designed a pretty comprehensive sampling campaign to collect samples from a variety of nutrient reservoirs of interest. And these include things like lake bottom sediments, the sediment pore water, which is the water in the interstitial space of the lake sediments. We sampled particulate matter, ceston, and in this pool would be included phytoplankton. We sampled brine shrimp and also collected water column samples of both the upper brine and the deep brine layer. And for this kind of slew of sample types or nutrient reservoirs, we collected these samples at 10 sites in the lake, and they are shown in this map on the right and in the purple dot kind of symbols. And the sites that we identified capture a variety of Great Salt Lake conditions. So shallow sites, deep sites, sites with the deep brine layer, sites without, sites overlying sediment or an overlying microbialite. So we tried to capture the variability that is present in the system. We also captured material that is deposited through the water column using sediment traps. So this again is the dead organisms as they fall to the bottom of the lake, capturing that material and analyzing it. And these samples were collected at 4 sites throughout the lake, and they are shown in these black triangles. We also continue to monitor river inflows for nutrients and added a few analytes onto our existing nutrient monitoring program that we have going on at the USGS. And then we deployed traps to capture material that is deposited through atmospheric deposition. And so we had paired traps located at 9 sites around the lake, and they are shown as the yellow kind of diamonds here in this map. So all of the sampling efforts took place last summer. We started in about mid-July, and this went through September, with the bulk of samples being collected in August. And because it was such an intensive sampling campaign, the lake water sites, these kind of purple dots where we collected sediment, biota, and water column samples, each site took a single day. So we had a team of folks on the boat collecting all the samples. At the end of the day, we would kind of hand off samples to our lab crew, where many samples had to undergo a further kind of laboratory processes before they could be analyzed. And these photos just sort of illustrate snapshots of the work we completed. An example of an atmospheric deposition trap in this bottom left, syringes for pore water extraction, what the sediment samples looked like, our sediment trap deployments, and then as well as some lab work we did. So as of now, all of the sampling is complete for this effort. In the end, we were able to collect almost 200 samples for over 1,200 analyses. And really what we're doing here is we're just generating a bunch of new information that will help us better understand nutrient dynamics and nutrient processes in the lake. So our current status, kind of the things we're working on currently, are to analyze any remaining samples. The bulk of our analyses are complete. However, we did do all this work during a pandemic, and we were relying on a half a dozen or more different labs. And there were various challenges associated with COVID along the way. And we still are waiting for some samples to finish some processing before they can be analyzed. So the bulk of our efforts currently are focusing on organizing all the data we are getting back. We're checking it for quality, and we're organizing it into a format that we're then going to release publicly in what we call science-based, so that it is accessible to anyone online. So, but we have started to look at some of the data also, and I wanted to share kind of 3 things that from data we've collected. So we're going to take a quick look at some water column nitrogen concentrations, and also look at preliminary estimates of nitrogen mass distribution in the system, and then look at some preliminary estimates of atmospheric deposition rates. So we'll start by looking at the water column nitrogen concentration. So at each site, we collected we collected samples at multiple depths. So, and at deep sites where there was a deep brine layer, we collected 2 water samples in the upper brine layer. So this is where we observed there's oxygen, there are phytoplankton and brine shrimp. We collected 2 samples in the deep brine layer where there is nothing living, as we can, well, no phytoplankton and no brine shrimp, and has very distinct chemical characteristics and is without oxygen. So 2 different, very different water bodies here. And then we also linked those water column samples with water extracted from the sediments in the pore water. So in this plot on the left, I'm showing nitrogen concentrations and its forms. So on the y-axis, we can think of a depth below the surface. So starting at the water surface and going down through the water column, we see through the upper brine layer, the mixing zone, the deep brine layer, and then into the sediment pore water. And then on the the x-axis, we have the nitrogen concentrations. So the first thing to point out, we'll just look at total nitrogen. So these are the symbols shown in the black dots. What we see is in the upper brine layer, total nitrogen and its various forms it's pretty steady. It's pretty constant. And then when we move down into the deep brine layer, what we observe is a huge spike in total nitrogen concentration. So greater concentration of nitrogen mass in the deeper water. And this has been observed by us and many other researchers in the past. So this isn't necessarily new. But what's interesting is when we start to look at the different forms of nitrogen. So let's first look at particulate versus dissolved. So the dissolved fraction is shown in these blue triangles, and the particulate is shown in this purple kind of square triangle. So we can see there's a big spike in particulate nitrogen. Again, this is consistent with just what we observe, what we can see in the sample itself. It's a much darker sample. It has a lot of suspended material. And we know that there's a lot of organic material that's just kind of getting trapped in that high saline water. And so, yeah, it's not surprising that we see a spike in total particulate nitrogen here. What's also interesting is if we then look at the inorganic and organic fractions of nitrogen, we can see that dissolved organic nitrogen dominates in the upper brine layer. That's really what's making up most of the total nitrogen in the upper brine. And then when we move down into deeper waters, we can see it kind of begin to decline. And especially when we get into sediment pore waters, the dissolved organic nitrogen values really fall. And what kind of takes its place is this inorganic fraction. So we see an increase in inorganic fraction in the deep brine layer, and especially in these pore water samples. And so this is basically just indicating that there's a degradation of organic nitrogen happening, and it's turning into an inorganic form of nitrogen. And I think historically, inorganic nitrogen has been thought of as being more bioavailable to things like phytoplankton. So this is pretty interesting. And then what we still don't know is what happens next. So we get it into this inorganic nitrogen form, which is ammonia in this case. Is it being buried and removed from the system through the sediments? Is it going to volatilize into a dinitrogen gas and be removed via the atmosphere? Or is it recycling back into the upper brine where it can actually be kind of influence the food web and enter the enter the food web once again by feeding phytoplankton? And at a couple of sites, we did a very high resolution sampling of the water column through basically really honing in on the mixing zone of going from the upper brine layer down into the deep brine layer and getting very high resolution nitrogen concentration data to better understand, characterize the mixing zone. It looks like it's happening over about half a meter, this transition between nitrogen forms and also just spikes in nitrogen concentration. And we're hoping this higher resolution data might be helpful in calculating the flux rate, the diffusive flux rate from the deep brine to the upper brine, so we can begin to understand how nutrients may be entering the upper brine, that biologically active zone, once again. Okay, so now we'll go to kind of the second data sharing exercise. So looking at the distribution of nutrient mass at a given site. And how I'm kind of conceptualizing this is to think of, okay, say we're at a site on the lake, let's take a square meter of the lake and just move downward through the upper brine layer, into the deep brine layer, and then into the sediments. And so how much mass is in, how much nutrient mass is in each of these pools, as we're calling them. So far we have data for upper brine, deep brine, sediment, as well as for brine shrimp and the pore water. And this exercise is really trying to get at one of our main objectives, which is to quantify nutrient mass from multiple pools. And so now here I'm showing a bar plot of our estimated masses per pool. So on the y-axis, we're looking at nitrogen in this case. So mass of nitrogen per pool in grams for 2 stations. And these different colors represent the different pools. So looking at, again, all these sediment, pore water, the water column, etc. And these 2 sites represent sites in Gilbert Bay. So what we call 3510 and GB14. So sites in kind of the central and southeastern parts of Gilbert Bay. And so kind of right off the bat, what we observe is that there's an enormous amount of nitrogen mass tied up in the sediments. And in this case, we're looking at the top 1 centimeter of sediment. So in the case of 3510, the site in the central part of Gilbert Bay, we're estimating that about 80% of the nitrogen mass at this site is tied up in the sediment. And about 18% is tied up in the water column. Very little nitrogen mass is observed in brine shrimp or in the pore water. In contrast, at GB14 in the southeast part of Gilbert Bay, we do still see that the sediment pool dominates nitrogen mass. There's the most nitrogen mass there, but it is a lower fraction. And there's a lower amount of nitrogen mass here overall. And we have actually quantified these distributions for all 10 sites, and we do see there's some site-to-site variability. And so we're curious to look into that a little bit more and see what could be affecting that and driving the different nitrogen mass amounts, as well as the distribution for the different sites across the lake. And then finally, I'll just give you a snapshot of kind of what we're doing in terms of estimating atmospheric deposition. So to our knowledge, previous estimates of nitrogen deposition to the lake have used regional models of nitrogen deposition, but they haven't actually used measured material. So to our knowledge, this is the first attempt anyone has made to actually capture material deposited from the atmosphere and then measure that material for nutrients. So we deployed these paired traps again at 9 sites around the lake. These traps were deployed during the massive windstorm that happened last September. So we did lose a few samples in that event, or a few samplers, a few traps in that event. And so we ended up with these 6 samples that then we are now using to estimate rates of nitrogen mass deposition from the atmosphere. And then we're exploring different ways of interpolating those values across the lake to get a better sense of the kind of the overall rate of nutrient deposition. You can kind of begin to see with these darker green colors where the greatest rates of nitrogen deposition are estimated to be, kind of around the northern part of Antelope Island here. And so with that, I'll just kind of briefly give you kind of where we're headed in the next steps. So first thing is to get the data published, and we're working on that pretty diligently at the moment. And then once we have all that organized, we're really going to dive in to analyzing the data and interpreting it to answer the questions, our 3 main objectives of this study, with the goal to have a draft report by the winter. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And thanks for listening.
Christine, I'll just jump in. There's a few things in the chat, and Wayne, thank you. Wayne is pointing out that when we're talking about low lake levels, if we were to evaluate the lake, take the railroad causeway out, and if we did some calculations on lake levels, in 2016 we may have already hit the lowest lake level. My introduction to this whole presentation is just we're only considering what we've measured at that Saltair site. And then moving on, Aaron McCulley asks, do you think atmospheric deposition rates observed would apply to areas higher in the watershed?
That's a good question. Like higher up in the mountains, or?
Maybe Eric can jump in.
I will say that the atmospheric deposition traps were kind of situated 2 meters above the ground, and the idea was to try and get a regional signal of what is coming in via the atmosphere. I don't know that it would apply to areas higher in the watershed. I mean, there's a lot of characteristics around Great Salt Lake that are very unique. You know, given Salt Lake City, given all the dust mobilization. So I don't think so. I don't think they would apply. That would be my first gut reaction to that.
Okay, and then Krishna asks, how would you evaluate the effects of the seasonal variability?
That's a really good question, Krishna. I mean, you're right. What we did was a snapshot in time. And so to evaluate the effects of seasonal variability, we would need to kind of repeat this analysis during different seasons, during different hydrologic conditions, during different biotic conditions, specifically when there are no brine shrimp. You know, how do phytoplankton and nutrient cycling occur in those different kind of regimes? So kind of one of the goals of this work is to really hone in on like, well, what's really important here? It was kind of a, you know, shotgun approach of trying to identify, you know, what's most important here, and then maybe in subsequent studies, trying to hone in on those factors in a more refined way during different seasons.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Christine. Appreciate that very much. And Ryan, thank you. We'll look forward to seeing further iterations of your status report in the future. So the next item on the agenda, I'd note that this is the 30th anniversary of the Great Salt Lake as a Western Hemispheric Shorebird Network site. And in celebration of that, we've invited Marcelo Castellino and Rob Clay of Monomet to talk to us about Great Salt Lake as the avian hub of the Americas. Are you with us?
Yes, we're here, and I think Marcela is the presentation to share. So let's see if she can pull that up. You start by saying thanks very much, everybody, for this opportunity. So Marcela and I are with the Executive Office of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, WISN, which is based out of Manomet, which is a Massachusetts-based nonprofit. Although I'm based in Paraguay and Marcela's in Argentina. Marcelo, creo que lo estamos viendo en modo de presentación. No lo estamos viendo en modo de presentación.
Ahora sí, ¿me estás viendo?
How are people seeing this? I'm seeing the whole set of slides on the side. Is that the case for everybody else? Or?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know what is happening.
We can still see them fine if you want to just talk through.
Yeah, well, in the interest of time, let's go with how it is. So, yes, as was already mentioned, we're here because it's the 30th anniversary of Great Salt Lake as a WISN site. So it's a chance for us all to celebrate. I think we're actually the light entertainment for this meeting. And I think it's important to point out that, you know, this is not a celebration like a birthday. It's not just a question of surviving. It's actually a question of, you know, active participation, effort by probably many people on this call and many others, so that, you know, 30 years on from the original designation, the site still meets the criteria as a WISN site. So hopefully you can all use this as an opportunity to celebrate some of the work that you've done over the years to help conserve shorebird habitats around Great Salt Lake. Next slide.
Are you seeing the next slide, Rob? I'm sorry.
I am, yes. I'm still seeing all the slides at the side, but I see we're on the second slide. So just very briefly, the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network is a voluntary initiative to try and conserve critical sites for shorebirds throughout the network. The current data about participants in the site in the network are on screen. I've highlighted Great Salt Lake there. And really, this could be it. This could be the slide for the whole of the presentation, in the sense that, with the exception perhaps of a few sites in the sort of northeastern North America, I'd argue that every site on the map there has a connection to Great Salt Lake through shared migratory species. And yeah, that's really the take-home message for this presentation. I've just lost the presentation, Marcela. Oh, no estoy viendo.
Are you seeing the presentation now? Are you hearing me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. And are you seeing the presentation now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
perfect.
There we go.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. We don't usually use Google Meets for meetings, so it's part of the challenge. Well, so the take-home message really of this whole presentation is that Great Salt Lake is connected to so many other critical sites for shorebirds and other waterbird species throughout the hemisphere. Next slide. So Great Salt Lake was one of the first sites to join the network. It was the 15th, joining in April 1991, primarily due to its importance for Wilson's phalarope. Anywhere up to perhaps 2/3 of the global population of Wilson's phalarope using the lake, but also critical importance for a whole series of other shorebird species. Seeing as we're talking about anniversaries, I just flagged that the image of Great Salt Lake then, I think I had just come into the world when that image was taken. So coincidentally. Next slide. And as I've already mentioned, incredibly important for a whole series of waterbird species. I realize that I'm probably preaching to the choir here, in the sense that many of you are probably very familiar with these species and very familiar with some of the connections. These are all species for which Great Salt Lake is of global importance in terms of the percentage populations that use the lake. There are also species which primarily connect Great Salt Lake within North America. Where I want to spend just a little bit more time today is on some of the longer distance connections. So next slide. And those connections really extend from outside of the Americas right down to the very far south and areas in between. So for instance, a lot of the long-billed dowitchers which migrate through Great Salt Lake are quite possibly coming from Russia, and even as far east in Russia as pretty much the divide between European and Asian Russia. Other species such as red-necked phalaropes connect to marine areas. So the Galapagos, for instance, one of the most important wintering areas for red-necked phalaropes is the Humboldt Current and areas in between the various Galapagos Islands. And so a large percentage of the population of red-necked phalaropes using Great Salt Lake almost certainly is using that area. And then perhaps for me, one of the strangest experiences in terms of connections was visiting the one mainland breeding colony of king penguins in Tierra del Fuego, the Chilean part, and there swimming amongst the penguins were a couple of Wilson's phalaropes, and pretty much as far south as you can get. So just incredible connections that Great Salt Lake has within the Americas and beyond. And really the reason why for WISN that connectivity is so important, and why Great Salt Lake is so important in this context, is it's really set the whole flavor, if you like, of how WISN works through building connectivity between sites, going beyond the connections made by the birds and actually establishing connections between the people working at the sites to share experiences. And that really started with a twinning exercise between Great Salt Lake, Mono Lake, and Mar Chiquita in Argentina back in 1992. It was really the first effort to explicitly connect sites, and that eventually evolved into, next slide, Marcela, into the Linking Communities initiative, joining Chaplin Lake in Saskatchewan, Canada, with Marismas Nacionales in Mexico, and then expanding beyond that to sites in Peru, to sites in Chile, to sites in Argentina, all connected through the same shared species, and almost certainly in most of those cases the same individual birds. And over the past 10, 15 years, through Linking Communities and related initiatives, very significant advances have been made in conservation at those sites, through really being able to catalyze efforts because of that connectivity. So for instance, in the case of Peru, a new reserve and WISN site. In the case of Chile, a key wetland, which at times harbors 30% of the wild population of Franklin's gull, literally just coming into roost there for a few days, but critical during that period, saved from development because of that, led to the celebration there, the Dia de la Gaviota, the Gull Festival. And then Mar Chiquita, a site very similar to Great Salt Lake in many ways, and currently the focus of a concerted effort to create a new national park, and Marcela will be talking a little bit about that in a moment. But really just to emphasize that the connections go far beyond the birds, and it's all about linking the human connection, the human communities that are dependent on these sites. Next slide. And on that subject, one of the interesting connections already mentioned, the brine shrimp connection. So we have sites where there's active shrimp farming. And what is a key food source for larval shrimp is brine shrimp. Also, what happens to be a major threat if you're a shrimp farmer, it's a flock of white pelicans descending on your shrimp farm and eating your harvest. So this is an area we're working in particular in Nicaragua to really not only look at ways to conserve shared shorebirds, but look at ways to alleviate threats posed by shared waterbird species, such as the white pelican. Next slide. And the species, so typical of Great Salt Lake and typical of many other sites connected to Great Salt Lake is the Wilson's phalarope. And here I'll hand over to Marcela just to tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry for the technical inconvenience. I will be mentioning very briefly some activities that we are supporting related with Saline Lakes and Wilson's phalarope. And I want to start sharing about the monitoring activities that we are supporting. We don't have much information yet about Wilson's phalarope habitat use and distribution in South America during their non-breeding season. So in order to start to fill those gaps, we conducted in 2020 the first simultaneous survey for the species in the entire non-breeding range, covering 4 countries and over 800 sites in a 10-day window period. And in 2021, this year, during February, we repeated the survey, but this time we focused our efforts in potential key sites and key sites already identified for the species. So we visited over 40 sites. And these monitoring efforts are focused on reviewing the global population estimate for the species and to know better the trends, the local and the global trends. Also, we are the results obtained in these surveys are will be feeding the update of the Wilson's Phalarope conservation plan that we are working on. And we are also in continued collaborations with researchers and conservationists from the Wilson's Phalarope working group across the hemisphere. But in a more local scale, I want to share just very briefly some activities that we are supporting in Mar Chiquita Lake. That is in Argentina, in Córdoba. And this is the most important non-breeding site for Wilson's Phalarope, with records of over 500,000 short phalaropes every summer. And as Rob mentioned, this lake is part of a three-way twinning with Great Salt Lake and with Mono Lake that was declared in 1992 based on the ecological similarities of those sites and the importance for the Wilson's Phalarope. And in Mar Chiquita Lake, currently we have a process for the creation of an Ancenusa National Park that will be protecting the whole area, the lake, and it will be the biggest national park of Argentina, and we are hoping to have very good news about this process before the end of this year. In the meantime, we are supporting several activities related to this process. And I will be sharing some of them. For example, in the conservation area, we are working with the local communities and other NGOs that are leading the process. And we put some interpretative signs in towns around the lake, the area. And these sites are informing about the importance of the Mar Chiquita for Wilson's Phalarope, but also are informing about the connections, the international connections, and the importance of other saline lakes like Great Salt Lake for the species. We are also supporting an ecosystem services assessment to inform the community about the services the ecosystem provides to them, but also to support the national park process designation. Related with monitoring, we are also supporting shorebird surveys in all the lake to gather baseline information about the shorebirds that are used in this lake. Over 30 species of shorebirds are depending on this lake. And this information will be used to inform zoning and monitoring protocols for the future national park. And we are also supporting specific Wilson's Phalarope monitoring with monthly aerial surveys because of the size of the lake and the numbers of phalaropes from October 2020 to April 2021. And we are repeating these surveys next year with the aim to gather information about abundances, but also habitat use to also inform the zoning and monitoring process in the future national park. And finally, I will share just very briefly an educational program. We are also supporting education and community engagement. And we are supporting an environmental educational program with focus on 9 towns around Mar Chiquita Lake. But the focus is here in Mar Chiquita, but with the international component, because we are seeking to connect students, teachers, and specialists or researchers or conservationists from the three-way twinning lakes, Great Salt Lake, Mar Chiquita, and Mono Lake. And this educational program will be launching this month in May. So, and all these activities are looking for inform the communities and strengthen the connections with the sites and also with other sites across the network.
So just to wrap up, I think the 30 years of history of Great Salt Lake as a Wisdom site has really inspired so much action, so much conservation at other sites, initially through the connectivity provided by the shorebirds themselves, increasingly through the connections made between the human communities at each site, at the conservationists working at each site. And what I increasingly find myself doing is every time I have the opportunity to participate in an event regarding Great Salt Lake, and it's wonderful to see a number of faces I recognize. Everything that you're doing there is so relevant to so many other sites in the Americas that share the same species. There are so many lessons that we would love to be able to apply elsewhere and need to be applied elsewhere. So if any of you fancy a sabbatical, then please let us know. The skills, the knowledge that you have are definitely applicable and most definitely needed at other sites that share the same resource. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob and Marcella, very much for that presentation and for reminding us of the importance of Great Salt Lake ecological. Appreciate your joining us. Any quick questions here? Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is public comment.
Okay, Don, Dan raised his hand. I don't know if he has a question.
Dan, do you have a question on that?
Yeah, please. When are we going to meet in person?
I don't know that I can answer that definitively, Dan.
Okay, well,
hopefully soon, July or September.
There is a question in the chat, Don, about where do Wilson's phalaropes breed next?
Okay. Rob, Marcella, do you want to answer that?
Marcella is best placed to answer that. She actually studied them breeding at Great Salt Lake. So.
I'm sorry, can somebody repeat the question?
¿Dónde anidan el Phalaropus?
Oh, breeding in the Great Plains of North America and Canada, and I have been enough lucky to be in the Great Salt Lake in one summer, the nesting of the Wilson's phalarope, and I found it in the, maybe I will need some help with the English from Rob, but ¿cómo se dice los pastos donde anidan los phalaropos?
Yeah, in wet grassland areas.
Yeah, and we found several nests in the shorelands, wetlands. Great Salt Lake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's now move to our public comment period. I know who is there who would like to make a public comment? Joe, are you still interested?
Yes, I am.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, Joe, why don't you go ahead?
Regarding the presentation USGS gave showing lake levels and sort of the flat line that's occurred, and I guess my view of the world is limited. In the past, I would say that's unprecedented. That response is unprecedented during that period, and looking back at lake charts from before, I'd say over a couple decades, unprecedented. We spent a fair amount of time, on various sort of spin-off efforts, HCR10, talking about how we can enhance communication between sort of not just lake stakeholders, but sort of watershed level stakeholders. And it feels like it didn't happen this time, that we're just sort of reading the gauges and wondering why it flatlined. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places, but I guess I would throw the question out there, like what can we do to better communicate the expectation of that? And then I guess going forward, how can we, what should we expect? Is there more releases coming in the future that would enable the lake level to resume its recovery or not?
Thank you, Joe. That's a question that would take a fair amount of time, I think, to get to the bottom of, but it's a valid question. We'll happy to entertain a quick response, and then we'll note it for, it's get the discussion on a future agenda.
I mean, the future agenda, Don, that's going to be, midsummer, and I guess we'll.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it right now. What's your specific recommendation?
What's the expectation in the next month or so for additional releases to the lake, if any? I'm not sure who's best to answer that.
I can maybe chime in on that, Joe. Darren from Heber Basin, at least on northern Utah. Yeah, with the drought scenario that we're currently in, we're not expecting Echo Reservoir to fill, and that's the early water right holder on our system. That's Weber River. Echo will not fill, and then the lower portion of East Canyon likely will not fill. That's Davis and Weber Canal Company. And so it's just with the river so low, we really don't even have any natural flow in the river to speak of. I mean, we're essentially on storage right now. And so just because of the low water year, we don't expect any additional releases other than, the contracted releases that we're contracted for. And then we've also cut our irrigation contracts, both wholesale and retail, by 20% this year, just to continue to try to save some storage water into next season because of how drastic things are right now. So, tough situation in terms of how much water is available to the system right now.
I appreciate that, Darren.
Hey, Don.
I guess
sorry. Don, if it's okay, this is Todd Adams.
Yes, please go ahead.
Joe, just so you're aware, Bear Lake started releasing about the 1st of May and pumping out of the lake. So because the natural flow had fallen so far that they started pumping out of the lake quite early this year. So that is also happening.
Other responses? Joe, are there other things you would like us to do?
I guess, towards some of the recommendations in the HCR 10 process of enhanced communication. I don't question the management practice and, the natural conditions are what they are, but I guess just a general heads up, of the plan and relative to the lake would be welcome. So the mineral extractors and I'd imagine brine shrimp community, can plan.
I'm with you there, Joe.
I might have a suggestion in some of our previous, not in this, but like our board meetings and those type of things, we have water supply experts come in to talk about what are the conditions on the ground, typically from the NRCS snow survey, USGS, those type of experts who could come and present to you on what the water supply conditions are looking like earlier in the year. That's the same information that Darren receives when he goes to those type of meetings. So it might give you a heads up, so that's maybe a recommendation to add to your early spring calendar.
Don, thank you, Candace. Don, maybe there's a representative from GSLAC who should be attending meetings proactively to garner that information. And I would, myself, I probably need to start doing that if we're not getting the kind of, downward, communication, to us as lake users.
Joe, I'm happy to do that, to attend any of those meetings, and also happy to convene a subgroup of folks on the council that want to talk about these issues or identify what are the meetings, what is the information that we do need right offhand. So
perfect. That'd be great, Laura.
Laura, let's do that, and then we can work on that offline.
Okay.
What needs, just so you guys know, from a response, if we're going to flatline and not gain water in the lake, this year, there's an immediate sort of response, required by by my company and others, I would imagine, in terms of intake canal management, better part of $1 million to do that, and any permits needed to do that, just so we could, make do late summer.
Well, I should let you all know, we sent out inquiries to all of the mineral operators on the lake, just asking them, based on the drought conditions, based on the pandemic, how are their operations anticipated to be impacted this summer. So Joe's been the only person that's responded so far, but we are inquiring with the other operators on the lake just to see how this drought is likely to impact them. So.
Thank you.
Looks like, is Dawn frozen, or is everyone just? Dawn, can you hear us?
That's when you got to move a little bit to make sure everyone knows you're not frozen.
He's frozen.
Yeah, I think he's frozen. So we can go ahead, Joe. I'll follow up with you and Candace about some potential discussions. Anyone else who wants to be involved in these discussions, please just email me. And oh, Lynn, I see your hand. Thane, okay. Were there any other comments on this matter or other matters?
I have a comment. First of all, Joe, thank you very much for this provocative catalyst of, this was a really difficult meeting, I think. And yes, I think we all want to see progress moving forward and increased communication so we can play our respective roles in moving the lake forward respectively. So thank you for that. And a year from now, we'll have our 2022 Great Salt Lake Issues Forum, and with revisions in the program that was proposed for 2020, we will be incorporating aspects of the HCR 10 focus. So there's that. I also wanted to ask if the Advisory Council would consider for a future meeting item to bring back the Promontory Point Resources landfill issue to the floor. It has applied for its Class 5 permit to take out-of-state waste, and I think it would be timely to bring that back to the council and be able to ask questions. Perhaps a representative from the Division of Waste Management and Radiation Control as well. So that's all I had to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. This is Dawn. I'm back with you. My computer shut down, and so I missed. I'm not sure I missed, but it was a good conversation. Joe, appreciate you raising the issue. Just to summarize, Laura is going to try to attend those. We'll need to make sure she's informed of whatever venues might be possible, and then we'll develop a way for her to communicate that information out to us rather than waiting for a meeting time in between. Would that be satisfactory, Joe?
Yes, that's great.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. Other public comments? Yes.
Max has his hand raised and I believe has some great information to share.
Max,
hey, thanks, Laura. I just wanted to share with everyone, thanks to a lot of people on this call. This morning, DWR released a press release. This year, 2021, is the year of the shorebird here in Utah and the year of the Wizard site at Great Salt Lake. I'll share a link to Governor Cox's, it has a link to the declaration as well as the press release from DWR.
Thank you, Max. Other items in the public comment time?
Dawn, if I could just make the connection, the reason that Rob and Marcella are here today is because the Great Salt Lake Bird Festival is going on this week up in Davis County. And and in conjunction with this governor's declaration. So I just wanted to let folks know that's how Rob and Marcella came to be with us today, is because they're the keynote speakers at the Bird Festival on Saturday. So if people are interested in that, we can put the link to their presentation in the chat. But we appreciate them joining us for this and for the Bird Festival.
Thank you for making that link, Laura. Others under public comment? I do recognize we're running a little late. I apologize for that. We have a few more items to discuss.
I have a question.
Far away.
Okay, this is Zach Frankel of Utah Rivers Council, and I just have a question and a comment. I'll start with the comment regarding the study expansion and the conservation impacts. So some of what was presented we don't agree with, and there are many water suppliers and water experts that don't agree with some of what was presented. And so my question is, just in the interest of time, whether there's going to be any discussion of the conservation impacts expansion, whether there's going to be any opportunity for the public to weigh in, to provide comments, either written or verbally, or whether this body would be interested in seeing some different perspectives which maybe contest some of the claims made in these conservation impacts studies. It's really important, you know, science is a process. It's certainly knowledge, but debate and dissent are a key element, and we need to make sure that when studies are performed that they adhere to the basics of water supply governance from coast to coast and not just be provincial ideas that don't match with time-honored findings by mainstay institutions like American Waterworks Association. So I recognize we're busy, so I don't want to take a lot of time, but I appreciate the opportunity to put that in the hopper for future discussion. It would be great to have a robust conversation about water conservation and really look at the numbers and the facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach. Other comments?
I have a comment, Don. This is Heidi Hoven.
Heidi?
I would like to just add on to the previous comments that have been made regarding the low water and the serious concerns behind that. And that is, I'd like to suggest that you bring into the conversation the effect on wildlife, specifically bird use around the lake. I think it might be an interesting and informative information to fold into maybe one of your next meetings with the survey work that the state currently does and anybody else.
Thank you, Heidi, for that suggestion. I've noted that. Other comments? That's great. That's most comments we've had in a while. I appreciate that. Let's move to the agenda item, member discussion, recommendations, and actions. Marcel Shoup is asked to speak to us about S1466. Marcel, you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you, Don. I know we're running out of time, but I think that the presentation today by Rob Clay and Marcella Castellino really highlights the importance about the connectivity of saline lakes and their wetlands across the Western Hemisphere, and certainly even in North America. And understanding what is happening with these lake systems, just like this discussion we're having right now about Great Salt Lake, is really important. And it's really important to think about the health of that network as well as the health of the individual lakes. So because our program focuses regionally, we have been working with Senator Merkley in Oregon, where Lake Abert is located, and Senator Romney in Utah for the last couple of years to advance legislation that would support a USGS-led 5-year, $25 million program doing a regional assessment and monitoring effort to actually look at an integrated approach, looking at water quantity, quality, birds, and habitats. And that legislation was introduced in 2020. It had to be reintroduced in 2021, and I think many of you probably saw the news articles. I would say thank you very much to many of you who are on this call who actually wrote to Senator Romney requesting his support. And the legislation really does provide for a stakeholder-driven process to really help build the science foundation, and could not only support lakes in the Great Basin states, but that includes Great Salt Lake. And so if you're interested in learning more, I'll stick a link in the chat. But also I would, if you're interested in letting your senators know that you appreciate that they're even thinking about saline lakes and the importance of these water bodies, please be sure to send a note or an email. And we'll be continuing working and keep you apprised, because in addition to trying to move this legislation, we will have to also get an appropriation. So if you have any questions, happy to answer offline or whatever makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any additional issues that council members would like to raise for discussion at this point in time? Let me know. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you're on to the allocation of appropriations yet, so.
I was just going to go to that. So, as you know, we have $125,000 to allocate each fiscal year. We will have a discussion and hopefully make decisions at our July meeting as to how to allocate that money for the coming year. If you have specific recommendations of how you think we ought to spend that money, would you please, by June 15th, notify Laura Vernon and give her a brief summary of what you would recommend we undertake. And then that'll give us some time to prepare and evaluate and bring some options and recommendations back to the council for our July meeting.
So Don, that process is going to be kind of ad hoc instead of having we're going to individually look at the prioritization that we had, before in HCR 10, or is there going to be a subcommittee, or is it just all individual?
So the process we followed in the past that I anticipated we'd continue to follow would be to gather all recommendations and then bring them back to the council and see what the council wants to do. So we have that on our July meeting to evaluate, and we'll send out prior to that meeting a list of requests and recommendations. That respond adequately, Ann?
I was just wondering if we could have somebody look at everything that we have done and present it a little bit more coherent, because we've done so much, it's hard to remember what still needs to be done and what the best strategic way to lay it out. And that was what I was hoping. But
okay, we'll put together a list of what we've done in addition to the list of what is being proposed or recommended or suggested. It's a good suggestion, Ann. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We also are always interested in suggestions, recommendations for meeting topics for future meetings. I've heard over the last month or so suggestions regarding lake effect, mineral production, the state water plan, Bear River Canal upgrade plans. If there are topics you'd like to have addressed, Lynn mentioned one today. Please let Laura know.
So I do have another suggestion, and there's been a couple of suggestions in the chat box. I think it would potentially be interesting to see what the Division of Water Resources watershed councils, especially the specific one for Great Salt Lake, have a presentation of what that may look like or the intent thereof.
Okay, I've noted that. Thanks, Ann. Other suggestions? Okay, thank you everyone for staying with us for an extra 15 minutes. I appreciate that. I appreciate the presentations and the discussion. Our next meeting is Wednesday, July 14th at 10 o'clock. And then we have a meeting in September, on September 8th and November 10th. I'll now thank you for being here and entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Thank you, Joe. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any debate or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate, especially those who participated today.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Don.